Welcome back to When the Dust Settles. When the African Union recently praised Ethiopia for successfully conducting its seventh general elections, many observers viewed it as a sign of democratic progress in one of Africa's most influential countries. But to understand why this election matters, we need to go much deeper than the headlines. How did a nation that defeated colonial powers become one of Africa's most important states? How did Ethiopia move from monarchy to military rule, from civil wars to democratic reform, and from Nobel Peace Prize optimism to devastating internal conflict? And perhaps most importantly, does Ethiopia's later election represent a major democratic breakthrough, or is the country's political transition still unfinished? Today we examine Ethiopia's political journey, the legacy of the Derg military regime, the rise of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and the impact of the Tigray War, and why the African Union believes Ethiopia's seventh general election is a significant movement, not only for Ethiopia, but for the entire Horn of Africa. To understand Ethiopia today, we must first understand its historical importance. Ethiopia occupies a unique position in Africa's history. Unlike most African countries, Ethiopia largely avoided European colonization. The country's victory over Italy at the Battle of Endor in 1896 became a symbol of African resistance against colonial domination. That victory inspired generations of African nationalists and anti-colonial movements across the continent. Ethiopia later became the center of African diplomacy. In 1963, as I always say, Addis Ababa became the headquarters of the Organization of African Unity, or OAU, which later evolved into the African Union. Today, the African Union headquarters remains in Ethiopia's capital city. This means that political development in Ethiopia often have implications far beyond its borders. For much of the 20th century, Ethiopia was governed by Emperor Haile Selassie. Under Selassie, Ethiopia pursued modernization and maintained its sovereignty during the period when many African countries were still under colonial rule. However, political power remained highly centralized. Opposition parties were limited. Democratic participation was restricted. Economic inequality persisted. By the early 1970s, public dissatisfaction was growing due to economic hardship, famine, corruption, demands for political reform. These pressures could ultimately begin the end of the imperial era. Then I look at the rise of the Derg military government. In 1974, a group of military officers known as the Derg overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie. The Derg established what became one of Africa's most powerful military governments. General Ahmed Adem was the first leader of the Derg movement. A well-respected officer, then became chairman of the Derg and acting head of state. He favored negotiation with Eritrean separatists rather than military solution. However, right, disagreements with more radical members of the military government led to a power struggle. By November 1974, Ahmed Adan was removed from power and killed. Following Ahmed Adan's death, the Derg appointed, what's his name? Tafari Benti became the chairman of Derg. He attempted to balance competing factors and factions within the military government, but then was becoming increasingly divided between moderate and radical elements within the movement. Then in February of 1977, Tafari Benti was assassinated during an internal purge. His death cleared the path for one of the most influential and most controversial leaders in Ethiopia, in Ethiopian history. Mengistu Haile Mariam took office. I knew that name when I was growing up. After the assassination of Tafari Benti, Mengistu Haile Mariam emerged as Ethiopia's dominant leader. From 1977 to 1991, Mengistu Haile Mariam effectively ruled Ethiopia. He transformed the country into a Marxist-Leninist state aligned with Soviet Union and Cuba during the Cold War. Under Mengistu government, major industries were nationalized. Private land ownership was abolished. Agriculture was collectivized. The economy became heavily state controlled. One party rule was established. Supporters argue that these policies promoted social equality and expanded access to education and healthcare. Critics argue that the system suppressed political freedoms and damaged economic growth. Perhaps the most infamous chapter in the Derg era was the Red Terror. Let me tell you a little bit of the Red Terror. Beginning in 1977, Mengistu launched a campaign against political opponents and suspected enemies of the state. Thousands of Ethiopians were arrested, imprisoned, tortured, or executed. Families often discovered the bodies of relatives left in public places as warnings to others. Human rights organizations estimated that tens of thousands of people lost their lives during this campaign. The Red Terror remains one of the darkest periods in modern Ethiopian history. While dealing with internal opposition, Ethiopia also faced external threats. In 1977, neighboring Somalia invaded Ethiopia, Ogaden region. The conflict quickly became a Cold War battleground. Sovereign Union shifted from Somalia, support from Somalia to Ethiopia. Thousands of Cuban troops were deployed to assist Ethiopian forces. With sovereign weapons and Cuban support, Ethiopia successfully repaired Somalia invasion. The victory strengthened Mengistu's government and increased sovereign influence throughout the Horn of Africa. Then we get the Great Famine Let's talk about the Great Famine between 1984 and 1985. I remember that time. The Dawn era was also marked by one of the worst humanitarian disasters in Africa's history. During 1984 and 1985, Ethiopia experienced a catastrophic famine. The cause included severe drought, ongoing civil conflict, agricultural disruption, government policies. An estimated 1 million people died. Images of starving children shocked the world. The crisis led to an unprecedented international relief efforts. One of the most famous responses was the Life Aid concept organized by Bob Geldof, which raised millions of dollars for famine relief. The famine brought global attention to Ethiopia's suffering. I remember that time I was a young man in Liberia. Now, the fall of the Derg. From the late 1980s, the Derg government was under immense pressure. Several factors contributed to its decline. Economic difficulties, military setbacks, reduced sovereign support as the sovereign union itself weakened. Several rebel movements gained strength, including the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which is TPLA and LF, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front. You also get Eritrea People's Liberation Front. In May 1991, rebel forces entered Addis Ababa. I remember that time. Mengistu Haile Mariam fled to Zimbabwe. The Derg government collapsed after 17 years in power. Now, after the fall of the Derg, the EPRDF took power. The new government introduced Ethiopia's ethnic federal government or system. Regional states were largely organized around ethnic identities. During the EPRDF era, economic growth accelerated, infrastructure expanded dramatically, poverty rates declined. However, critics argue that political competition remained limited. A major example came in 2015 or 2015 elections when the ruling coalition and its allies won every parliamentary seat. Many international observers question the competitiveness of the political system. Now, let's look at the rise of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. In 2018, widespread protests forced political change. Abiy Ahmed became Prime Minister. His arrival generated excitement both inside Ethiopia and internationally. Abiy introduced major reforms. Political prisoners were released. As opposition groups were allowed to return, political freedom expanded. Relations with Eritrea improved dramatically. A peace agreement with Eritrea and Abiy the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019. Many believed Ethiopia was entering a new democratic era. The Tigray War changes everything. That optimism surrounding Abiy's reforms did not last. In 2020, Tensions between the federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front erupted into war. The conflict became one of Africa's deadliest wars in recent history. The consequences were severe. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, according to various estimates. Massive displacement, humanitarian crisis, international criticism. The war raised serious concerns about Ethiopia's democratic future. Although the Pretoria Peace Agreement in 2002 ended major fighting, tensions continue in parts of Tigray. Meanwhile, security challenges persist in Oromio and Ahare regions. We are talking about this because of the election that just happened. Ethiopia's 7th general election that just happened. We're talking about all these problems that happened and then the election. So it is against this backdrop, Ethiopia has its 7th general elections on June 1st, 2026. The election was closely watched across Africa and around the world. The African Union Commission praised the election process and commended Ethiopia's National Election Board. The AU Election Observation Mission led by former Kenya President Uhuru Kenyatta reported that voting was generally peaceful, orderly, and conducted within Ethiopia's legal framework. Even IGA also congratulated Ethiopia and described the election as evidence of commitment to constitutional governance. You know, when bad things happen in Africa, people talk about it. But when the good things happen, it falls under the spotlight. International media don't carry it the way it's supposed to be. Prime Minister Abiy Prosperity Party secured another parliamentary majority. Despite praise from the African Union and IGA, concerns remain. Critics point to several issues: limited participation by some opposition groups, security concerns in Amoro and Omenia, incomplete voting in parts of Tigray, allegation of uneven or equal participation and political participation. But overall, the election was good. For these factors, many analysts argue that Ethiopia's democratic transformation or transition remains incomplete. The election may represent progress, but significant challenges remain. But why this matters for the Horn of Africa? The importance of Ethiopia extends beyond its borders. The Horn of Africa includes Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Sudan, and South Sudan. With the population exceeding 135 million people and one of Africa's largest economies, Ethiopia plays a central role in regional stability. Political developments in Ethiopia influence regional trade, security cooperation, migration flows, peacekeeping operations, economic integration. When Ethiopia experiences stability, the entire region often benefits. When Ethiopia faces instability, the consequences can be felt throughout East Africa. So that's why we are so concerned about Ethiopia. We are so happy. And I'm so proud that the African Union had an observer there who also observed the elections and reported that it was fair. The African Union praised for Ethiopia's 7th general election reflect more than the successful administration of a vote. It represents recognition of a nation that has traveled a remarkable and often turbulent political journey, from monarchy to military dictatorship, from ethnic federalism to democratic reform efforts, and through the devastating experience of civil war. Yet Ethiopia's story is still being written. The country continues to wrestle with questions about democracy, national unity, ethnic identity, security, and political inclusion. Whether the 7th general election becomes a turning point or merely another chapter in Ethiopia's long political evolution remains to be seen. What is clear is that Ethiopia's future will not only shape the lives of millions of Ethiopians, but will also influence the future of the Horn of Africa and, in many ways, the broader African continent. Folks, if you found this discussion informative, please like this video, subscribe to When the Dust Settles, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Ethiopia is moving toward a stronger democracy? Or do you think the major challenges still stand in the way? Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay informed as we continue examining the story shaping Africa and the world. Folks, once again, you are watching When the Dust Settles. My name is Pico Conway. Bye for now.